the King James Bible. Today we're going to talk about the translators. We talk a lot about the translations, but we don't focus on the translators. We're going to do that in this Bible study today. The translators begins with Queen Elizabeth I and King James I around 1603. Elizabeth, during her reign, was challenged by three ruling classes at that time: the state of England, the Episcopalians, and the Puritans. During King James' reign, the first, around 1603, 1604, he was confronted with just the Puritans and the Episcopalians. King James set up the Hampton Court, 1604, a need for a new Bible. And why was this? Well, the Great Bible was too cumbersome. If you remember, the Great Bible was a huge Bible, sometimes called the chained Bible. It was chained to the pulpit so that people wouldn't carry it away. Could you imagine today somebody stealing a Bible? Doesn't happen too often unless they're really hard up for a Bible. But the Great Bible was too big and cumbersome. The Geneva Bible was too controversial, and the Bishop's Bible was too careless. It was a poor translation. Although it was translated from Tyndale, the Great Bible, and the Geneva Bible, there was some sloppiness in the translation. And so a new Bible was needed. King James set up the Hampton Court, and there were some rules that were set down for translation. One of the best books that I've ever read on this subject is Translators Revived by Alexander McClure. This book is still in print and is available today. There were 15 rules for translation. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to pick out the highlights that I think were necessary or that we need to know about the translations. Number one, the text was primarily used from the Bishop's Bible by Richard Bancroft. Although it was a poor translation, it was a translation from the previous English Bibles. Number two, old ecclesiastical words such as church and baptism shall be retained, and the word congregation was not used for church. Number three, words with two or more meanings shall be used with the ancient fathers according to context and consistent with the analogy of faith. So words with two or more meanings were used in basically the context of the passage. Number four, no marginal notes were used except to explain the Hebrew and Greek words. Number five, the translators and revisers, first by individuals, then submitted the whole company for scrutiny, criticism, and final approval. And we'll talk about those companies later on in the lesson. But the translators and revisers first were done individually there were 54 men originally scheduled to translate the Bible, divided into three groups, and within those three groups were two groups. So there was three major groups: Westminster, Oxford, and Cambridge. And within those groups, there were two more groups, and each had a section of the Bible that they were to discuss. And like I said, I'll go over that in just a minute. Number six, sections of the books that were completed shall be submitted to other companies to be considered for approval. You have to remember, these 54 men that were picked translated different parts of the Bible, but eventually they would translate the entire Bible. Each man and each group was assigned a specific section of the Bible, but each man and each group would look at the entire Bible for translating and if there were any problems they saw, or if they thought that something wasn't translated right, they would bring it up before the group. Number 7, if a company doubted or differed in any place, they shall notify the original company. As I mentioned, there are 3 groups, and within the group there were 2 companies. They would notify the original company at the point where they settled, and the point was settled at a general meeting of the groups. Number 8, directors for each group shall be, number 1, deans of the Westminster and Chester area. Number 2, Regius professors of Oxford. Number 3, Regius professors from Cambridge universities. So the Westminster, Oxford, and Cambridge, those were the 3 major groups. And the head of each group would be a dean from these universities. Number 9, translation used that agreed better than the bishop's Bible will use Tyndale, Coverdale's, Matthew's, Great, and Geneva Bible, the previous Bibles. As I said, they used primarily the bishop's Bible, which was a good text, but poorly translated. Where the translation they found that would be better than the bishop's Bible, they referred back to either Tyndale, Tyndale was the original translator, Coverdale, Matthew's, Great, and Geneva Bible. All of these were previous English Bibles that were consulted. The method for the those were 9 things out of the 15 that I thought would be important. You can find those, though, 15 in Alexander McClure's Translators Revived. The method of translation. The method, 54 men were chosen, all dedicated to the study of Scripture primarily. Most of these men were DDs, doctors of divinity. They were earned doctors. Not like today, a lot of preachers get a DD, but it's not an earned one. It's given to them by a church or a denomination. They were divided into 3 groups, as I mentioned. 3 groups: Oxford, Westminster, and Cambridge. Within those 3 groups, there were 2 groups of Westminster, 2 groups at Oxford, and 2 groups at Cambridge. These 54 men were divided up into these different groups. Each member made his own translation. So these 54 men they started with, I believe they ended up with about 48 or 49. A couple of them died prior to the completion of the translation, but each member in each group made his own translation. When he got through, he presented it to the group, and they all went over, compared them with their translations. See how meticulous they were? This wasn't just translate and print. They went over and over and over these translations, and these were all scholars. When we get to some of the translators, some of these men knew 7, 8 languages fluently, conversant. Lancelot Andrews, one of the main translators, was conversant in 15 different languages. He knew 7 fluently. We'll give that in a little bit. Number 2, they met as a group and compared with each other. As I said, each man made his own translation within his group, and then they met as a group and they compared with each other's translations. Number 3, when completed, it was sent to the other 5 groups for assessment. So one group, let's say Westminster group number 1, when it was through, it sent it to Westminster group number 2, Oxford group 1 and 2, and Cambridge group 1 and 2. So you see, each group, each member in each group translated the entire Bible. It wasn't just translated by a few men, it was translated by all of them. And all these men were scholars, fluent in European and Eastern languages, as we'll get to near the end of this study. Number 4, when completed, the translation was sent to a select committee of 12 men, 2 from each of the groups. So the entire translation, it wasn't done at that point. It went to another group, a select group of 12 men, 2 from each group. This group met for 9 months, folks. 9 months they met. Stationary hall. They discussed difficult passages. Each passage was looked at a minimum of 14 times. I think they got it correct, folks. They just didn't translate and print. They translated, looked at it, retranslated, sent it to other people. They looked at it and assessed it and made their translations, and they compared them all together, and they came up with the King James Bible. Eventually, the Word of God for the English-speaking people from the original languages of Hebrew and Greek, and some, we mentioned Syrian in the Old Testament and Arabic in the New Testament. The translators. Now we get to the translators, and I'll mention the groups here again. 3 groups, 2 sections in each group. Westminster group number 1 was in charge of translating Genesis through 1 Kings. Each member in this group translated Genesis through 2 Kings. Group number 2, the New Testament epistles. That would begin with Romans through Hebrews. Those were the epistles of the Westminster group number 2. Each man made his own translation. They looked at it within the group. They met together. They all met and said, okay, let's see where we agree. Let's see where we disagree. If we disagree, they send it to a committee to iron out those disturbances or disagreements. Group number 2 was Cambridge number 1. They were responsible for 1 Chronicles through the Song of Solomon. Again, each man in this group made his own translation, and then he compared it with the translations of the other men in this group. Could have been 15 to 16 different men in each of these groups. Group number 2 of Cambridge was in charge of the Apocrypha. Now, the Apocrypha were hidden books written within the silent period, the 400 years in which there was no Bible, but the Apocrypha popped up, and this was not in the Hebrew language. So it was there, though, so they decided to translate it. Although they came up with it was of no value because it was not in the original Hebrew. And most of these Apocrypha Bibles were included in the Old Testament. Oxford group number 1 was entrusted with Isaiah through Malachi, the major and minor prophets. Group number 1. Group number 2 was entitled to translate the Gospels, the book of Acts, and the book of Revelation. Each man in each group, just like the others, made his own translation, and then they compared it with each other in their group, and then they sent it to the 5 other groups. Oxford 1, Cambridge 1 and 2, Westminster 1 and 2, and so on and so forth, so that every man had a chance to translate the entire Bible that was included in these 48 to 54 men that were chosen, as most of them were preachers, most of them were church bishops or some kind of clergy, and with doctors of divinity. They had completed their scholastics at either Oxford, Cambridge, or Westminster. Once they finally agreed and got it all together, they sent it to the Hall Committee at Statutory Hall, Stationery Hall. 12 men, 2 from each of the 6 groups, select men, and they, for a period of time, went over the translation again. They went over it to check for errors or check for word consistency. Once they finished this, it went to publication, to the publication committee, and again was looked at and made sure at that time the spellings were correct, the best that they can. Printers do make errors, we know that. And then it was sent to the royal printer for production. All of this began around 1604. It culminated in 1611. That's 7 years. This was not done overnight, as some of our new modern Bibles were done over the weekend with weekend warriors and non-students of the Bible. Now we'll look at some of the translators, and I'm only going to look at this briefly. Again, Alexander McClure's book, Translators Revived, you can look at these. Lancelot Andrews, one of the primary translators, he was in Westminster Group number 1, Genesis through 2 Kings. He was the dean at Westminster. He was the president of this company. He was the dean of King's Chapel. He was spent 5 hours a day in prayer for the translation of this Bible. 5 hours a day. These men did not have secular jobs. This is what their only job was. He possessed great ability in Greek, Latin, Chaldee, Syriac, and Arabic. This one man. Fully conversant in 15 languages. Learned a new language each year during Easter vacation. He learned a new language every year during his 2-week Easter vacation, in 2 weeks. Studied at Cambridge, majored in Eastern languages. This was just no fly-by-night translator. This was a scholared man, and most of these men were scholarly. Maybe not as much as Lancelot Andrews, but they were scholar. He was a great preacher called the Star of Preachers. John Reynolds, the Oxford group in charge of Isaiah through Malachi. He was an Oxford grad at 17. Man, I was 18 when I graduated high school. Lectured in Greek at Oxford at age 23. President of Corpus Christi College. Called the walking library. Great memory this man had. Highly skilled in many languages. John Reynolds didn't finish in his group. He died in his group. Westminster Group number 1. John Overall knew Latin so well he could speak and preach better in Latin than he could in English. Hardin Sarveya, Hebrew and Greek scholar. John Layfield, skilled in architecture, used to translate Exodus, in which the building of the tabernacle was. This man was skilled in architecture, and he was in the group that translated the book of Exodus. William Dewell, Arabic scholar, Authored 7-language lexicon: Hebrew, Syriac, and Chaldee. Folks, if we today try to get scholars like this skilled in languages, I doubt if we could find one or two even close to the qualifications these men had. Westminster Group 2, in charge of New Testament epistles. John Spencer, president of Corpus Christi College at Oxford, lectured in Greek at age 19. William Denkins lectured in Greek and theology at Trinity College in Cambridge. The Cambridge Group, number 1, First Chronicles through Song of Solomon. Edward Lively, professor of Hebrew, Trinity College, Oxford. The greatest, at this time, the greatest scholar of Eastern languages. Lawrence Chatterton, great scholar, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, excellent in French, Spanish, and Italian. Some of the Bible was translated into these languages, and they were translated from Spanish, Italian, and French into the English language. We mentioned some of those previous video. Cambridge Group 2, who's in charge of the Apocrypha, as we mentioned, was not in the Hebrew language, but they still translated it. Of course, it was found later that these books were not inspired by God. John Boyce, listen to this fella. John Boyce, B-O-I-S, read the Old Testament Hebrew at age 5. Could write Hebrew at age 6. Folks, I doubt if we have anyone in the world that could do this at age 5 and age 6. These men knew the languages. They knew the idioms. They knew every single thing about the background of the language, the culture of the language, and the language itself. They didn't just translate it. They knew the culture, the background, and idioms. He entered Cambridge University at age 14. I was graduating junior high school at age 14. He entered Cambridge at 14. Corresponded with his tutors in Greek. Studied Greek. Stop now. May I have your attention, please? This man studied Greek from 4 a.m. to 8 p.m. Come on now. 4 a.m. in the morning to 8 p.m. at night, this man studied the Greek. You don't think he could translate the New Testament by himself and get it right? And yet he had 47, 48 other men to check him out. Oxford Group number 1, Isaiah through Malachi. Richard Kirby, professor in Hebrew, Greek, corrected a preacher one time who gave 3 reasons why a word was translated wrong in this new Bible. Turned around and gave 13 reasons why the word was correct. All 16 reasons had been scrutinized by all of the translators, and they found Kirby was correct. Oxford Group 2. And I've just given you highlights of certain men. There was 8, 9, 10 different men in each of these groups. Some groups had more, some groups had less. Oxford Group 2 was responsible for the Gospels, Acts, and Revelation. John Hamar, noted Latin and Greek scholar, King's Professor of Greek University, master of the English style. No wonder why we say we have a perfect English Bible for for the English-speaking people. I would challenge any committee, any translating committee, to even match one of these men, one of them, in their scholastic ability. And yet they say the 1611, the King James 1611 Bible has mistakes in it and errors. I don't think so. Not with the scholastic ability and skill that these men had, not only in Hebrew and Greek, Latin, French, Spanish, German. These men were highly skilled and fluent in most all Eastern and European languages. I say, let God be true, but every man a liar. Thanks for watching today, and we'll continue our study next time. Thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day.